So once again, good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Milka Martell, and I proudly serve as the president of uh, the Friends of Pelham Bay Park. We are a non-for-profit organization working with Parks Department to ensure that the park continues to be a place used for recreation and conservation where anyone can go and learn more about the natural world. We host several events throughout the year, including trail maintenance events, removal of invasive weeds, programming at Orchard Beach, the drive-in movie, lectures, history walks, and so much more. So please visit us at pelhambay.org for more information for upcoming events. Also note that we are sustained by donations. So if you're willing and you're able, please consider donating, and the link will be in the chat, and you can also visit pelhambay.org. We are so excited this evening for tonight's presentation, Orchard Beach Before the Beach, which will be led by the amazing Kayla Mackey, who joined the Urban Park Rangers in 2017 and is currently the project development coordinator at Hart Island. I had the pleasure of paddling one of the Urban Park Rangers sunset paddles a couple of years ago, and Kayla led it, and she was just absolutely phenomenal. So I'm very excited for this presentation this evening. I hope that you enjoy it as well. And without further ado, Kayla, the screen is all yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. Yep, I'm Kayla. I work for Parks now, and I've been working with parks in the Pelham Bay area for a long time. And I've gotten really interested in the history, so I'm really excited to share some of the stuff that I found today. So welcome to Orchard Beach Before the Beach. Orchard Beach, as some of us may know, was open to the public in 1936. But people have been using the area for thousands of years. The Lenape called this area La Powachking, which also means the place of stringing beads. They were using the islands for hunting, fishing, creating wampum, and as the area became more colonized, the whole parkland was used primarily for farming before it slowly became a place that people traveled for fun, which is why we travel there now. So the area that we know today as Orchard Beach welcomed 1,655,425 people this summer, just this summer. So a lot of people want to visit, and a lot of people have been wanting to visit for hundreds of years. And as we'll discover, despite a lot of changes to the landscape, people have been visiting for a lot of the same reasons. So this, oops, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. This is Pelham Bay Park today. It's the largest park in New York City, and it includes a boardwalk and sandy beach. You've got tons of trails over here on Hunter Island and Twin Island. Nearby, you have City Island, which is a small community that connects over to this high island, which if you've ever been on the boardwalk, that's the one with the radio tower. And then also visible from the boardwalk is Hart Island, which is used today as the city cemetery and is also parks property. So the beach and the boardwalk were opened in 1936, and they were constructed in the years leading up to that. But Orchard Beach in the era that we're going to be talking about looks very, very different. And here's what I mean. Oops. So does anything look familiar? I guess, I don't know, Nilka, if you have a way, can anyone figure out where the boardwalk is today? Yep, City Island is right here. It's in the same place. High Island also in the same place, Hart Island. But you can see over here, Hunter and Twin Islands are actual proper islands. And then this area, Rodman's Neck, is separated, whereas now you've got a boardwalk running from about here, just touching Hunter Island, across this Pelham Bay, and encompassing some of Rodman's Neck. This area is now the parking lot, And then this area right here, you've got the lagoon, which has the kayak launch. Oh, sorry. So this period that we're going to be talking about is basically between 1800 and 1936, because that's when the ways that people were using Orchard Beach are the most similar to the ways that we use them today. So that's what I want you to think about. What are your experiences in Pelham Bay Park? What draws you to visit? People give a lot of different answers. People come for the sun, the swimming, socializing, the views, peace and quiet in the off season. Um, and people come for special events too. So there's a ton of reasons to visit the beach, and Friends of Pelham Bay Park just keeps adding reasons. So just keeping these things in mind, this is what we're looking at now. This is a map of Pelham Bay Park in 1885. Let's orient ourselves again. We've got Hunter Island right here. We have the boardwalk right here. And then Twin Island is just off the map. Here's Pelham Bay South right here. So most of this area, as you can see, is classified as woods, meadow, and pasture. During the early 1800s, Orchard Beach and Pelham Bay were extremely rural, and most of what we think of as the city is confined to lower Manhattan. Technically, the Bronx wasn't even part of New York City at this point. It was Westchester. The Bronx was the country, and that peace and seclusion made it prime real estate for a lot of wealthy gentlemen who were working in Manhattan. So this is a close-up of Hunter Island. For orientation, I've included the parking lot where it exists today, the Gray Mare. If you've done any hiking on Hunter, you've probably seen the boulder, and then just where it leads to Twin. In 1804, auctioneer and politician John Hunter purchased Hunter Island for around $40,000, which is about $1 million today, and then spent another $40,000 building and decorating a lavish mansion for himself and his family. They moved in 1810. His estate included apple orchards, pastures, a bridge to the mainland, stables, gardens, and of course, you know, his beautiful home. He was really drawn to the area because of its natural beauty, and the seclusion. You've got views of the Sound. I mean, even today, it's just a really, really beautiful place to be. And he was using it as his primary residence until his death in 1852. Here's the mansion itself in 1882. That's a portrait of John Hunter. The people building these estates and building these mansions, because he wasn't the only one building a mansion in the area, they really spared no expense for these homes. In 1839, actually, President Martin Van Buren visited this home, and he was treated to like rose-colored curtains. The dinner service had gold and silver dinner plates, all of the things like that. And the dinner accompanied 5 champagnes, 7 Madeiras, 5 Burgundies, and 4 Clarets. So they're drinking a lot of expensive wine as well. Later owners of Hunter Mansion, they were also decorating very lavishly. These pictures are from 1882. So it was a different owner at that point. It was a man called Albert Higgins. But you can see that he was also really invested in like a very lavish decorations for the apartment. Sorry, for the mansion. So this mansion and a lot of the others were privately owned and used as residences until 1888. Because that's when this 300-acre estate and all of the estates in the Pelham Bay Park space were sold to the city, mansion and all. So there were at least 20 mansions built around Orchard Beach during the 1800s. Hawkswood on Rodman's Neck is another example. Rocks from High Island were quarried and they constructed another massive estate in 1830. Um, the owner, Elisha King, he lived there until his death in 1836. And again, it was just passed between private owners until you hit that date, 1888. That's when the city purchased all of the land that would become Pelham Bay Park. So we've got at least 20 mansions, probably more. But that does not mean that Orchard Beach in this era was all estates and gentlemen. The same remoteness that was drawing wealthy people to move here was also drew people looking for more unsavory types of entertainment. And in 1842, that meant bare-knuckle boxing. So in 1842, 6,000 people boated from Lower Manhattan to Hart Island to watch a bare-knuckle boxing match between this man, Yankee Sullivan, and Bill Bell. It was a big deal. If you've ever seen Gangs of New York, Bill the Butcher of the Bowery Boys gang, he was said to be in attendance. The bout lasted 24 rounds, and Yankee Sullivan took home $300 for winning. I also just want to make clear, in 1842, this sport was illegal, and that meant there were not strict safety rules. The rounds weren't tied. They went 24 rounds, and each round ended when a boxer hit the ground. So these were incredibly violent events. And they also had political implications. This was one of the biggest sports in the mid-1800s because it was so tied up with the nativist movement and the influx of Irish immigrants during that time period. So this painting right here is from 1849. This is probably Yankee Sullivan's biggest match between himself and Tom Hyer. They were fighting for $10,000. And it was basically a proxy war between the anti-immigrant nativists, who were represented by Tom Hyer and his Bowery Boy gang. And then the Irish immigrants were represented by Yankee Sullivan, and he was backed by Tammany Hall. So this painting isn't of Hart Island, but it gives a pretty good idea of what the fights were looking like. All these guys in top hats, just watching two guys duke it out. This is the real life Yankee Sullivan. He was one of the most famous bare knuckle boxers in America at the time. He was born James Ambrose in County Cork, Ireland. And like 2 million other Irish citizens, he emigrated to the United States in the 1840s. Once he got there, he got involved with Tammany Hall and worked with them as an enforcer when he wasn't bare knuckle boxing. And eventually he died in San Francisco in 1856 under suspicious circumstances. So from here, we're gonna move on to 1888, when Orchard Beach and Pelham Bay became part of New York City Parks. So I just want to know, are there any questions before we move on? I'll give people a minute to gather their thoughts. That is a great question. It was Tom. Yankee lost, which I think may have led to him moving to San Francisco because that is a lot of money to lose. Yes, most of the houses were destroyed, which we'll see a little bit later on in 1936 or between 1934 and 1936. Which leaves a huge chunk of time between when the Parks Department bought these houses and when they were destroyed, and we'll kind of see what happens to them in the meantime. Yes, Yankee Sullivan was probably killed in prison in San Francisco. And yeah, Bartow Pell Mansion, that is the one remaining estate. There was a garden club that was running it at the time, so it was in a lot better shape than some of the other houses. So they were able to petition the Parks Department and have it saved, which makes it a really nice place to visit now. So let's check back in on our 1905 map. So again, just so we all know where we are, here's City Island. The boardwalk is here. Hart Island is down here, and all the trails of Hunter Island are over here. So this represents a real turning point in the way that Pelham Bay was used. The city purchased the entire area for parkland. City Island, High Island remained private property. Hart Island down here was already city property, but it was being used by the Department of Charities and Corrections, which was really what it was called in 1888. And from this time on, we start to see Orchard Beach being used by people who are from a variety of social classes. The clientele of the area changed from the extremely wealthy to more like the middle class and the working poor. Many of the park's users were recent immigrants from Europe also. And these people are using the park, they're recreating in a lot of the same ways that we do today. You got people wading in the water. People played games and sports. People got scolded by parks enforcement. And this rock is still there, actually. It's on section 11. You can see the top of it. People fished in the Sound. They used the canoe launch and the barbecue area. And they posed for adorable group photos, just like we do today. The teens on the right, or sorry, excuse me, the teens on the left, are posing in an abandoned mansion on Twin Island. They took a canoe trip from Throg's Neck. Yeah, UPS correcting conditions, I know. So this mansion, I didn't mention earlier, it was known originally as Fish Mansion, and it was built as a summer retreat in 1884. However, I didn't spend a lot of time on it because the owner, James Fish, did not get to enjoy it much. Before he could move in, he was jailed for causing a financial panic that involved former President Grant and the collapse of two major banks. So, didn't get to spend a lot of time there. And when the city purchased it, it was not really in use and had never really been lived in. People lived in it, but it wasn't the same kind of being passed on and on between like father son to grandson like you see on Hunter. So when the city purchased Pelham Bay Park, they were also purchasing these beautiful homes, and they had to decide what to do with them. Here is the mansion on Twin Island again. And these estates saw new uses as parts of the park. The city started leasing them to different organizations. Some were used for hotels, some were used for restaurants. And in the area right around Orchard Beach, right on the Sound, a couple of these homes were used for charitable organizations. So they were making sure that it wasn't just middle-class families that were able to enjoy the park. They made it a priority that the poorest of the poor were also able to get some fresh air and really just like enjoy the same things that we enjoy today, like a swim in the water, like the breeze on your face, which in a lot of the housing, like for example on the Lower East Side, that was in very short supply. So for some period between 1891 and 1910, which is when this photo was taken, this mansion on Twin Island is used by the Jacob Riis Foundation Summer Retreat for Children. Again, we've got this highly desirable place. It's peaceful, secluded, and people want to go there. So prior to 1911, also, Twin Island is only accessible by boat or canoe. So it's out there. This photo is some of the women who are involved in the Jacob Riis Foundation. And just as a note, during the time period, wealthy women were a huge driving force behind philanthropy, as we'll see when we get to Hunter Island. So Hunter Mansion was used by a charity called the Little Mothers Association. One of the shortfalls of children's charities at the time was their length. Not every child living in a tenement could just up and leave for a summer or even a week. A lot of these kids had really serious responsibilities. So the Little Mothers aimed to fill that gap because their program was for girls 6 to 16 who were the primary caregivers to their siblings. These girls did not have a lot of free time, so the Little Mothers mostly organized one-day events. They were leasing Hunter Mansion from the city for $1 a year from the mid-1890s until sometime before 1920, and they were calling it Holiday House. And this house was used to provide the girls just a day in the country to, quote, enjoy being little girls for at least a day. So you can see how the inside of this mansion has changed between 1888 and 1893. It's being used for a lot more people. They changed the wallpaper. Here is the same organization in 1904 with a lot of the girls posing outside. So when the Little Mothers came to visit, they would just basically have an amazing day from start to finish. The ladies who ran the organization would go from tenement to tenement, just trying to find whose children, like which of these girls had kind of devolved into being the primary caretaker for the family baby. They were described in some of the language of the time as little bent-backed girls, always with a baby in their arms and a half a dozen tugging at their skirts. So this organization arranged childcare for the day so the girls could visit Holiday House. They would take this horse-drawn tram ride. They'd get a visit to the doctor, which was key. They'd have time to play. They'd have time to pick flowers. And then they would head to the Long Island Sound for a sea bath, and as much food as they wanted to eat. What I really like about this picture between the last one is this is when they're first arriving, and they're posing for a photo, but they just seem so formal and adult. And you get to the time of the day where they're finally getting to go for a swim, and they all look so much more relaxed. So the history of the end of the organization is a little bit vague, but they may have been folded into the Fresh Air Fund, which does still exist today. So some version of this idea of getting kids out for fresh air, like that's still something that we do, that we support in charities today. So New York City in the 1900s, we are seeing a huge increase in people just looking for fun stuff to do. Quality of life is improving, public transportation is improving, the economy is booming, in the 20s anyway. So people are looking to be entertained. Parks are seeing a ton of use, and theme parks, dance halls, and bathhouses, they're popping up in all 5 boroughs. So with the existing popularity of Pelham Bay, it's no surprise that someone also attempted to build a theme park nearby. So this area down here where I've made this little red circle, this was the only part of Hart Island that the city did not own in 1924. So a Harlem millionaire named Solomon Riley purchased that property, and he built a dance hall, boardwalk, bathhouse, and bought 60 motorboats to ferry park goers with the idea of taking them from Orchard Beach, where it was already a popular place to be, and taking them over to Hart Island to experience his amusement park. And the reason he wanted to build this amusement park is because most of the privately owned amusement parks in the city at this time are segregated. So he was imagining this park as a place that would be safe for Black New Yorkers to enjoy the same kinds of entertainment that was sweeping the whole city. Unfortunately, the park never opened. You can see on this map, which is the same corner of Hart Island, it was acquired by the city in 1926, just before it opened, because the city became concerned that people who were incarcerated on the jail on the other side of the island would be using the motorboats to escape. So there's no pictures of the park since it didn't open, but I've included some other photos of amusement parks that were open during the same time period, the 1920s. Just to get a kind of the idea of what he was basing his park on, and then also, just what people were expecting to see when they came to amusement parks. Um, So, how did Orchard Beach draw such consistent crowds between 1900 and 1936? I mean, public transportation, it's certainly better than the 1800s, but we're still talking about horse-drawn railways, monorails, for most of this time period. It's still a pretty tricky place to get to today, honestly. You got to take the train to a bus, but it was even harder back then. Um, so Orchard Beach's popularity really revolved around the fact that the Parks Department issued permits for camping. And then private owners nearby, they rented out their property too for the same reason. So this was a really popular place to camp. And families would spend entire summers camping in Pelham Bay. Some people definitely still came for the day, but the atmosphere around became a lot closer to a summer camp because people were able to stay for such a long amount of time. I have a statistic that says in 1912, Orchard Beach was seeing 2,000 visitors on summer weekdays and 5,000 on summer weekends. And I just want to be clear about what I mean by camping. We're not talking about backpacking. We're talking about glamping. These are the kinds of tents that we're talking about. It's really more like a cabin or a bungalow. People were not roughing it during their summer vacations. The insides of these tents had places to cook, places to eat, places to sleep, places for you to just hang out. And they were really organized. Different camps had different names, like Camp Lulu, Camp Adelaide, Camp Hutch Inn, like on Hutchinson. And the camp that existed on High Island, which is that small island right next to City Island, it really illustrates how the bungalows became more and more sophisticated as time went on, and as the activity became more popular. So this was one of the private properties that was rented out to campers. And in 1912, in the zoomed in portion of this photo, you can see it's just kind of like a bunch of tents. But compare it to 1930, and we can see how that little camp changed. So the Miller family, they purchased High Island in 1925, and they were charging $300 to $500 per season for campers to establish a summer cottage. So there were 20 to 40 families there. There were no cars allowed. The access was by foot or over a sandbar. They didn't establish a walkway to City Island until 1928. But you can see the structures are a lot more organized. They're made out of wood now, and there's a lot more of them. So this is becoming an incredibly popular activity. By the end of the 1920s, these camping structures had fully transformed into cottages, bungalows, really sturdy wooden structures. And especially with the onset of the Great Depression, some families started living in them full time. And I really just find that fact very interesting because you almost see a transition from the park being used for like seasonal recreational use back to a place where people have private homes. However, we know that didn't happen because Parks Commissioner at the time, Robert Moses, he had a different idea. In 1934, he canceled the leases for all of the campers, and he started construction on Orchard Beach as we know it today. So the way the park was used changed again. What remained the same was people's desire to visit, have fun there, and that's a tradition that continues all the way up until today. So next time you are enjoying salsa on the boardwalk or hike on the Kazimierov, just remember that you are a part of history too. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Do we have any questions in the chat? Okay, hold on. There was a question. What is the name of the amusement park that was going to be built on the park?
So it didn't have an official name since it hadn't opened. But in the press, if you want to look it up more, it was being called Negro Coney Island. Because that's how Solomon Riley was advertising it. So if you want to learn more, there's also a really cool art installation that was at the Shed, where they have actors playing Solomon Riley, and he kind of talks about his vision. So there's a lot of cool history there.
Let me see if I missed any questions. You answered about the Little Mothers. I think there was more there was a question about how did the fish of Fish Mansion cause such havoc?
So essentially, I also want to be clear, during this time period, financial panics are a lot more common. If you go back, there's a financial panic in 1817 and 1819 and 1830, like, so it wasn't that hard to make a bank collapse the way that it is today. But essentially, he was using President's Grant reputation as like a good, solid, trustworthy person to get people to deposit money with his bank. And he was also tricking two other banks into kind of getting in on this scheme. And once people realized that they couldn't trust this man, they caused a run on the bank. So everyone went in to get their money. And when people do that, the bank is no longer financially viable. And the bank collapsed. Two banks collapsed.
Kayla, someone asked if we can see any of the foundations of any of the homes still today.
You can actually. You can on Hunter Island find a lot of the remnants of the houses and also just the work that he did. So like those little stone gutters, those have been updated by the Parks Department, you know, over several decades, but those are the design was original to him. And if you walk around in the woods back there, you can find a lot of different like things from that era. The bungalows of World War I see. So the bungalows did exist during World War I. And people were staying at them, so that period like 1914 to 1919. This was a really popular place to visit. And a lot of the monuments in Bronx parks are named after World War I veterans because that was also a huge boom time for the Parks Department, receiving funding for those kinds of things. What am I missing? Are there any books participants can read? So one of the things that I found a little bit challenging about this presentation is that there's not one great book that I can recommend. There's a lot of information and papers out there. And honestly, Marianne, you might also have some suggestions for books to read. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Hart Island became a potter's field in 1869. And it continues to act as the city's cemetery today. So in 1869, the city stopped using Ward's Island, which is now Randall's Island, as the cemetery, and they started looking a little bit more long term, and started using Hart Island because it had more space. Sorry, I'm struggling with the chat function.
There's another question on if you could tell us more about the Fresh Air Fund and how it came to be there, and also just a statement that women were at the forefront of environmentalism during that time as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's actually the Bartow Pell Mansion Museum that was saved by a women's gardening club. They were maintaining the grounds, they were maintaining the garden, and they were huge advocates for saving that piece of history. So the Fresh Air Fund, I don't know a ton about it. It's a very old organization. A lot of New York City charities that exist today started in like the 1870s to the 1890s out of like this huge immigration boom. Like there's a huge amount of income inequality. That's why it's called the Gilded Age. It's a layer of gold, but you peel back the cover and it's not quite as nice. And I think at a certain point, the people, a lot of times women who were the driving force behind these organizations either passed away or they moved on to other things. And so these like smaller piecemeal charities kind of were gathered into larger charities that still exist today. Jacob Riis settlements also still exist. But that's about all I know about the Fresh Air Fund.
Okay, Kayla, someone asked, is there a map that exists that can help us identify the remnants of the structures today?
I wish. That would be an amazing tool to find out more about the history. But not to my knowledge.
Okay, and then someone else asked, can we assume that the bungalows on City Island had the same origin as campsites?
So probably, I'm not exactly sure which bungalows you're thinking of, but a lot of these constructions within the park and outside the park were happening at the same time. It's the same water, it's the same beach, and it's essentially the same people who are looking to have a good time. Some people were leasing them from the Parks Department, and some people were building them on private property, but all of these structures kind of had a similar format.
And then another question is, what was your favorite part when it came to learning more about Orchard Beach? What is your favorite fact or interesting
Favorite
take?
fact. I really just love all of the pictures that I found from like this period between 1899 and 1915. There was this photographer, George Stonebridge, and he summered every year at Orchard Beach, and he just took pictures of everything. It's just like people living their lives. That's what I really liked about it. Like the picture of um the parks enforcement yelling at everybody. Like that's so relatable. Or the people using the barbecue area. Just to like see so clearly, like I feel like a lot of times when you see black and white photos, it's people being very stiff and formal, and I definitely saw a lot of pictures like that, but just the ones where you can see that everyone's been having fun the same way for several hundred years in America is I really enjoyed looking through them. I had a hard time filtering out which ones I was going to use for this.
Okay, I don't know if there's any more questions. I'm trying to get into the chat. I'm not sure what the question is asking. So it said, how did it affect Twin Island, and any articles we could read for further information? I'm not sure what they're asking about specifically, what affected Twin Island. And then someone suggested maybe using USGS topographical maps to go back far enough to see the structures, the locations of the structures. And their GIS website has a great overlay function, so you can see how it relates to today's features.
Yeah, that 1885 map of the park is really helpful because at that point most of the mansions were still standing. And different mansions definitely like deteriorated at different rates. But by 1934, A lot of them were in like just totally abandoned and really bad shape. So Robert Moses made a lot of decisions that a lot of people don't like, but I feel like that one at least is defensible. Because it would have been a huge amount of money to restore them, and then who gets to use them? Whereas having the trails there and having picnic areas, like that's a lot more open for everyone.
So just one other thing, and then there's a couple more questions. So a couple years back, we actually did a virtual lecture on the Huntington Woods in the Pelham Bay South, which talked about the mansions that were there and the remnants. And if you go back, we have a YouTube channel, the Friends of Pelham Bay Park has a YouTube channel where you can go back and watch that lecture, and there was photos that showed some of the existing stuff that's still there, so you can kind of see what got left behind if you're interested in seeing an old mansion in the southern part of the park. And so someone asked who now administers the Bartow Pelham Mansion Museum. So it is a Parks Department Historic House, and it has an executive director, Allison McKay. And is there I don't know if there's an organization tied to that. Mary Ann, do you want to answer that? And then while we wait for Mary Ann, were the bungalows of City Island from barracks of World War I I don't know. Does anyone know?
I'm not 100% sure what bungalows on City Island. I haven't seen them, but the Army was using parts of Pelham Bay Park for their operations during World War I. So it's definitely possible. You can go back and you can look at some pictures. I think it's in the Department of Records, or it might be the U.S. Congress Library. I was pulling pictures from a lot of different places, but there are structures that were being built during World War I. Yeah, by the Naval Academy. Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Marianne. But I'm not sure which structures are from that and which are from camping. I'm not sure.
So Marion also answered in the chat that the Bartow Pell Conservancy currently manages the Bartow Pell Mansion. And Sam linked the Huntington Woods talk in the chat if you wanted to just copy the YouTube link and go listen to that talk as well. And then this presentation will also be on the YouTube channel shortly. Is there any other questions? So, Milka, do you want to just wrap us up?
Sure. Great. Kayla, thank you so much for this amazing presentation, the images, the information, just so much valuable stuff here. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Feel free to check out our website at pelhambaypark.org. Follow us on social media and YouTube. And, for more information on upcoming events, please check out the website. And, lastly, please know if you enjoyed this presentation and you enjoy our events, we are sustained by donations. No donation is too small or too large, and there is a link on our website. So good evening to you all again. Thank you, Kayla, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Be well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. All right.
Have a good night, all.